Hello Raptors fans, and welcome back to Raptors Report. Today we'll be examining the ins and outs of the Jakob Poeltl trade, so let's dive right in. It's a homecoming. Jakob Poeltl is once again a Toronto Raptor. The Raptors got their man and the race is on for the postseason. I'm a little conflicted about the trade, but there are certainly reasons to be very excited about the Poeltl trade if you're a Toronto Raptors fan. Let's start with the positives. The first being that Jakob Poeltl is a good player. You may have seen Poeltl's latent potential in his first few seasons in the league with the Raptors, but he really has blossomed into a strong player on both sides of the ball. On offense, he's a smart player who can help you run the basic plays that keep an offense humming. High pick and rolls, dribble handoffs, high post passing, etc. He's also a great offensive rebounder who will help the Raptors get extra possessions, and he's a good finisher around the basket with nice touch on his layups and the ability to elevate and finish lob passes. On defense, he's a mobile rim protector who has the instincts you want from a big man. His defensive motor is great in that he really wants to contest as many shots around the rim as possible. Another big change between his first few seasons in the league and now is that Poeltl is much stronger than he used to be. Poeltl used to have trouble guarding the bigger players in the league, but that is no longer the case as he's filled out his enormous frame and is far more of an immovable object than he used to be. The other reason you should be excited about this trade is that Poeltl fills one of the biggest positional holes in the entire NBA. If there was one team that you could say needed a center, it would be the Toronto Raptors. There's probably an entire video to be made about the Raptors' defensive system, why it worked last season with very little rim protection, and why they're struggling this year, but I'll try to keep it short and simple. Coming into the season with rose-colored glasses on, I thought that the Raptors were onto something with their active, no-middle defensive strategy that used multiple long forwards in conjunction to create rim protection by committee. Also known as Vision 6-9, the idea that you could play without a center is kind of like walking a tightrope without a safety net. Exciting, but dangerous. It worked last season when the legs were fresher, when the scouting reports hadn't quite identified the weaknesses to exploit, and when players were able to give 100% every possession. As we've seen this season, playing without the safety net a center provides often leads to fatalities, and boy, have we seen a lot. The Raptors' strategy in a nutshell was to send multiple defenders to guard the pick and roll, send multiple defenders to the rim to cut off drives, use extremely aggressive closeouts to bother shooters, and gamble for steals on the perimeter. This has created weaknesses that teams are exploiting. Opposing teams have been using the aggressiveness of the Raptors' system to their advantage by forcing multiple rotations, bending the defense out of position multiple times in a single possession, and eventually ending up with a very, very open shot, either right under the basket or in the corner for a three. Those are the two best shots in basketball, so it's not a surprise that other teams have been very efficient scoring the ball. The Raptors have been executing one element of their strategy very well, which is to force turnovers. But even that has not been good enough to make up for the glaring lack of rim protection and the shortcuts that the Raptors have to use in order to bypass that. With Poeltl, the Raptors have a very solid defensive big, but, in my opinion, they need to adjust the defense to account for that. Bigs are much slower than forwards, and as we saw in his first two games, having him out on the perimeter either through a switch or having him come up high to guard the pick and roll will limit his effectiveness. The Raptors have to go back to the ultra-boring, traditional, ho-hum, but most importantly, effective drop coverage scheme, where the big drops deeper into the paint on the pick and roll and dares the other team to either drive in or hit mid-range shots. The Raptors could and should use a popular strategy, which is pre-switching the screen, where Poeltl switches coverages prior to the pick and roll to avoid being put into pick and roll defense. What you want is Poeltl standing near the paint, ready to help out on drives, rather than out covering the pick and roll action at the top of the arc. Anyway, I think that Poeltl is a great fit for the Raptors this season, and he's pretty much exactly what I've been asking for months now. So why would I be conflicted about the Poeltl trade? Well, I think a lot of this comes down to finances, draft equity, and the overall strategy of the team. The first and most obvious reason to be suspicious of this trade is that Poeltl is on an expiring contract and will be looking for a raise this offseason. As you may know, the Raptors have two other impending free agents, Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent Jr. Crunching the numbers, accounting for Thad's non-guaranteed deal next year, the upcoming draft pick the Raptors will have to pay, and other considerations, the Raptors will have about $60 million to spend on these three free agents before they go over the tax. Fred VanVleet is rumored to want a $30 million contract, or more. Gary is rumored to want a raise into the mid-$20 million range, and the going rate for starting caliber traditional centers in the NBA is around $15 million, which Poeltl should certainly get, perhaps even more than that. Now, I'm no math whiz, but if you add those numbers up, the Raptors won't have enough to pay all three of them unless MLSE goes into the luxury tax, which I highly doubt, or they make some cost-saving trades in the offseason. There are obviously ways for the Raptors to escape from this predicament relatively unscathed, but they have added a lot of negative variables that have to be accounted for. The more problems you create for yourself further down the road and in the future, the less equipped you are to withstand a bout of poor fortune. Another issue I have with the trade is the timing. The issues with the Raptors aren't some revelation that everyone figured out the day before the deadline. These are issues that myself, fans of the team, and other people who cover the team noticed months and months ago. Poeltl's presence on the team at an earlier date might have had a huge impact on the current record, considering how absolutely rotten the team has been in the areas Poeltl helps address. The cost might have been higher, but it's kind of like buying a coat for cheap at the end of winter when you already have frostbite, instead of ponying up at the beginning of the season when you could have used it more. The margin for error at this stage in the season, which is already 3/4 of the way through, is pretty slim. The Raptors have to do a lot of winning between now and April in order to justify making a win-now move at the deadline. Now, it's definitely possible, but with their current record, they have put themselves behind the 8 ball. The last reason I'm skeptical of this trade is the draft equity the Raptors gave up, which is rather substantial. For Poeltl's expiring contract and bird rights, the Raptors gave the Spurs next year's top 6 protected first-round draft pick, as well as additional seconds. This seems like a total no-brainer if you're the Spurs. They probably weren't going to pay Poeltl this offseason, and the Raptors currently have a losing record, so if you're looking at it from their perspective, maybe the Raptors implode and the pick ends up being in the lottery next year. For the Raptors, it kind of commits them to building around the current core, and disincentivizes any sort of talent sell-off or rebuild scenario. The reality of the situation with the Raptors is that while Toronto is a fantastic city who NBA players always go out of their way to praise, the team's history in free agency has been pretty dismal. Draft picks and trades have been the main avenues the team has had to add talent year over year. People may scoff at the worth of a late first-round draft pick, but that is exactly where the Raptors found two of its best players in Siakam and OG Anunoby. At the end of the day, being able to re-sign Poeltl this offseason may be worth more than a first-round pick, but the Raptors did not pay a trivial cost in order to acquire him. The Poeltl trade, when it comes down to it, has a lot of variables attached, more than your average trade. If he were signed to a fairly priced long-term deal and it happened earlier in the season, the trade would be pretty easy to stand behind. I think Poeltl is a good player and he fits what the Raptors need. But the uncertainty around his contract and the state of the team in general has me a little worried. Will it work out? I guess we'll have to see. And that's this week's episode. It's been a while, but I'm glad to be back creating content. What do you think about the Poeltl trade? Good value? Bad value? Just in time, or too little too late? Let me know here in the comments and also on Twitter, where you can reach me at Raptors Report. Please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content, as that helps the channel grow. And as always, thanks for tuning in to Raptors Report, your source for in-depth Raptors content.